I finally had the keys to my new house after weeks of anticipation. I was packed before the offer had even been accepted, and so when I got the keys, I wasted no time moving in. This was the start of a new chapter in my life, and a place I could call my own, without worrying that the landlord was going to show up and demand more rent from me, or accuse me of damaging his house. I was both nervous and excited. I'm in my early 20s and never bothered with college, as I really believe it's a waste of time for most. Instead of college, I decided to get a job at a local warehouse, packing inventory ready for shipment. It paid quite well, and there was always availability for overtime, which is how I saved up for a deposit. My whole life, people told me I was worthless and would never amount to anything, so to be so young and be on the property ladder really felt like a huge achievement for me. After I had moved all my stuff in and got the place looking how I wanted it to look, I started to notice a rotten smell coming from the dining room. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming it was drifting in from somewhere. But as the weeks went on, the smell continued to get stronger and stronger. I looked around the house, checking everywhere, including the basement, but I couldn't figure out where the smell was coming from, so I called someone in to try and help me figure out what it was. I had a man from pest control come out and instantly say that it was the smell of rotting flesh. He assured me that it was nothing to worry about and could be easily fixed. We just needed to locate the exact place the smell was coming from. I left him to do his thing, and an hour or so later, the man told me he was confident that the animal was somehow in the wall between my dining room and kitchen, and it wasn't going to be a cheap fix. He had to knock part of the wall down and then arrange for it to be fixed up again. I was frustrated and knew it was going to cost me, but I remember thinking that this is what it takes to be a homeowner, and I just had to live with it. I gave the go-ahead and went off, leaving the man from pest control to it. A short time later, he called me into the room, saying he had found the source of the problem, and that I should come in and take a look. I couldn't believe my eyes when I walked in. Laid out on a plastic sheet were 4 dead dogs. The man from pest control told me I had to report it to the police, as they weren't there by accident, and someone must have put them there. I called the police and waited for them to show up at my house, when I noticed one of the dogs had a collar with a tag on. I called the number, and as it turns out, it was my next-door neighbor, Stefan. I hadn't really spoken to him other than a nod and a brief hello. Stefan came round, and I could tell by his face as soon as he walked in that it was his dog. Fighting back the tears, he also told me that the other dogs also belonged to our neighbors. As it turns out, the man who I bought the house off hated dogs and would always complain and argue with the neighbors about them. He didn't get on with anyone on the street, and he got his revenge just before he moved out. The police eventually turned up, and they called someone to come and take the dogs, saying they would need to have an autopsy to confirm their cause of death. I don't know what happened after that. People don't really talk to me from the street. I think they feel I'm partly responsible. My ex-husband and I had just split up, and he moved in with his girlfriend at the time. Our daughter, Emily, had just turned 8, and my ex didn't argue when I said that she would stay with me. After spending months living on my aunt's couch, I finally saved enough to rent a little house on the outskirts of Reno. It wasn't the nicest place, but it was clean and affordable, and it had everything we needed. It was such a relief to finally feel like I could stand on my own 2 feet again, but that happiness was short-lived. The day we moved in, I noticed a man next door peering over the fence from inside a cloud of cigarette smoke. I thought about going up to introduce myself, but decided against it. There was something about the way he looked at Emily. He didn't smile or nod to us, like someone who was curious about new neighbors moving in. He looked at us like he hated us. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that we were being watched. Once in a while, I'd spot his tall, gangly silhouette behind his curtains, and any time Emily went outside to play, his gaunt face seemed to materialize from the darkness, peering through the yellowed film on his living room window. I don't know if he had a job, but it seemed like he never left his house, and his constant presence made it hard to relax. As much as I wanted Em to feel safe, I was glad when she started opting to play in her room instead of in the front yard. Looking back, I think we both sensed something was off, but at the time, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I think I wanted to believe we were safe because, well, it wasn't like we had anywhere else to go, and maybe he was just a lonely man who wasn't good at talking to people. God, I was so stupid. I think we'd been there for about a month before he finally came around the hedges and walked up my driveway. The warm sunshine seemed to retreat as he crossed the lawn, forcing an off-putting smile. His clammy fingers curled around mine as we shook hands, and he introduced himself. I'm just going to call him Mr. R, since the investigation is still open. Mr. R asked if we needed any help around the house. I politely declined. His eyes shifted as Emily came outside to ask me if we could make spaghetti for dinner. His smile faded, and I excused myself to take Emily back inside. That night, I woke up to a strange sound. Leaving all the lights off, I tiptoed to the bathroom and peeked through the tiny space left by the open window. I could see Mr. R from the shoulders up. It looked like he was shoveling, like furiously digging in his backyard, grunting and swearing under his breath every time he thrust the shovel downward. The next day, I called the landlord, but he quickly dismissed my concerns and said that Mr. R had lived there for years, and no one had ever complained about him before. One day after dropping Emily off at school, I noticed his car wasn't parked in the driveway. I was supposed to be at work in a half hour, but I knew this might be my only chance to get a closer look. Slipping through the side gate, I glanced back toward the street, praying that he didn't drive up and catch me snooping around. My eyes fell immediately on a 3-foot-wide circular mound of disturbed earth. My heart pounded and my pulse roared in my ears as I forced myself to put one foot in front of the other. I stepped on the mound and the smell intensified. As I pulled my shirt up to cover my nose and mouth, my stomach twisted into knots. Maybe it's compost. Maybe he had a big dog that passed away. My thoughts raced as I rationalized all the possible explanations. I spotted something black and fibrous stringing out of the dirt and kneeled down to get a closer look. A wave of nausea swept over me, and I reached down to pick up the tangled clump of hair. It's a dog. It's a dog, I repeated in my head over and over again. But as I pulled the lock of hair, I quickly realized it was too long to be a dog's. This was not a dog. The smell wafted up and my stomach spasmed. I threw up and scrambled to my feet, making a mad dash for the side gate. I slammed my front door, locking every window and both doors. Panic surged as I thought back to all the times he'd stared at my daughter while she played with her chalk in the driveway. My call to the police was frantic and barely discernible. I sat on the floor, looking through a crack between the curtains, dreading the moment his car would pull up and those dark, beady eyes would lock onto mine. The police arrived, and the 2 officers went into the backyard. A short time later, the whole place was blocked off with yellow tape. I watched as they wheeled a gurney with a sealed body bag out to haul it away. Mr. R never did come back to the house in Reno. From what I've seen online, they never did find him, and the investigation is still open to this day. Last winter, my brother Tom invited me to his new house in the suburbs. He'd always been kind of a screw-up, so I was really shocked when he called me up and said he bought a house for himself. I knew he didn't have a lot of money, but he said that he'd gotten a really good deal on the place. I was expecting something small and run down, but when I showed up, I couldn't believe my eyes. The place was huge. It was 2 stories, and it even had a swimming pool. I knew I shouldn't have said anything, but I had to ask him why it had been so cheap. Tom just shrugged and said that he had an arrangement, whatever that meant. I decided not to press the issue. He gave me a quick tour, and then we settled into the living room to talk and drink wine. Things were awkward at first. I hadn't seen Tom in 2 years, not since I started dating his ex-girlfriend, Natalie. He'd accused me of stealing her from him, even though they'd already broken up. It caused a huge rift between us. But after a few minutes of chatting, I could feel the old Tom come back. We talked about movies and work, and it seemed like all the bad blood between us was gone. I assumed that being a new homeowner had helped him get over the past. Tom kept encouraging me to drink, and I was starting to feel tipsy. Things were going pretty well until someone knocked once on the front door, and Tom instantly went pale. He said, "I think it's my neighbor," and then he got up to answer it. There was a tall man standing outside. He walked in without saying anything, as if Tom had been expecting him. He was dressed all in black, with a wide-brimmed hat that hid the top half of his face. He walked past Tom and sat right next to me, still not saying anything. I waited for Tom to introduce him, but he didn't say anything. So I smiled at the man and told him my name. He didn't smile back. I couldn't really see his eyes, but I knew that he was studying me. I turned toward Tom. "You didn't mention that your neighbor was joining us," I said, trying to be as pleasant as possible. I didn't want them to see how creeped out I was. Tom left the room without answering. I was alone in the living room with that man. He wouldn't stop staring at me. I tried to make small talk, but he didn't seem to hear me. This was really weird. He was wearing black gloves. Slowly, he reached out and poked my arm. "You lift weights, right?" he asked. It was the first thing he said to me. Yeah. And you're a non-smoker, right?" "Yes." What was going on? I tried to stand up, but he grabbed my wrist and pulled me back down. "Your brother says that you're quite healthy," the man said. "Is that true?" I was healthy. I took really good care of myself, but I wasn't going to answer any more of his questions until I found out who he was and what he wanted. "Who are you?" I asked. That was when he smiled. It was the coldest, darkest smile I'd ever seen. He was still holding my wrist, and I could feel his fingers squeeze tighter. "Let go of me!" I shouted. That's when I noticed his other hand reach into his pocket and pull out a cloth. It smelled like chemicals. I'd seen enough movies to know that he was about to chloroform me. He tried to shove the cloth at my face, but I twisted out of his grip and jumped to my feet. The man was much bigger than me, and I knew that he'd definitely be able to take me in a fight. I had to run. I raced toward the front door while he walked toward me. I unlocked the deadbolt and ran outside. I was looking over my shoulder, so I didn't realize that Tom was standing in my way until I collided with him on the porch. Tom grabbed me by the shoulders and held me in place as the tall man walked closer. "What's going on?" I shouted. Tom looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't have enough money for this place, so I made another arrangement. Please don't fight him. He said it'll be painless." I knew that the man was right behind me now because I could smell the chloroform. If I didn't do something, he'd knock me out and then, I don't know, kidnap me? Harvest my organs? I couldn't believe that my own brother would betray me like this, just for some stupid house. I could see the regret on Tom's face. He hated what he was doing, but he still wasn't letting me go. His face was so close to mine. I couldn't move my arms, so I thought back to all the times Tom and I fought as kids. How could I get out of this? Just as the man reached around and shoved the cloth toward my face, I jerked forward and headbutted Tom right in the nose. He screamed in pain and let go. That gave me enough time to push past him, run to my car, and speed away. Once I got far enough away, I called the police. Less than 10 minutes later, 2 officers met me on the road, and we went back to Tom's new house. The door was wide open, but there were no other signs of a struggle. It's been 3 months since this happened, and I have no idea where Tom is. After that night, he disappeared. I don't know for sure, but I think that the man took him instead of me. He needed his payment.